No slides, so don't worry if nothing shows. So times, I think we've probably all noticed, are fairly tough at the moment. Businesses are kind of starting to wonder about what's the impact of the global economic crisis is going to be on them. And I think a lot of businesses are starting to think that it's time to pull the horns in and to try and do more with less. But now is not a good time to stop innovating. And equally, it's not a good time to stick with old bad habits, particularly bad habits that are costing us time and therefore costing us money. We need to get back to basics and to start to re-examine the things that are familiar and ask questions like, how do we collaborate? How do we communicate? And in particularly, to look at the existing tools that we have and ask whether there are more efficient, more productive, and more communicative ways that we can work. Now, one area that's really rather poorly examined, very rarely examined, is that of email. Email is one of the fundamental tools in business. We use email all the time, and we do it without even thinking about it. 10 years ago, if you wanted an email address, you had to make a business case for it. You had to specifically ask for it. Now it's the first thing you get when you get a new job, is your log on to your email account. It is completely ubiquitous. It is the default way that we communicate. But it is becoming a very serious problem. There have been a number of studies over the last few years. One by an email tool vendor called Clear Context. They discovered that 38% of people are getting more than 100 emails a day, 13% getting more than 250 emails a day, which is a massive amount of email if you think about it. 56% of people think that they spend too much time in email, more than 2 hours a day, and 1 in 5 of us is spending over 4 hours, that's over half of your working day, just sorting out email. But I think really the reality is worse than that, because we tend to underestimate when we are asked, for example, how often we check our email, although half think that they check their email every hour, and 35% of people think they check every 15 minutes. When people are observed, it actually comes to light that a lot of people are checking their email every 5 minutes. This is a huge amount of time we're spending just checking to see if there's new email coming in. And many of us have some kind of alert set up, whether that is a pop-up alert or a flashing icon, or even one meeting I was in a few weeks ago, they actually had the "you've got mail" little voice came out of nowhere, and I thought, my God, I thought that only happened in Hollywood, but no. People's computer actually do say, "you've got mail." And because these alerts interrupt us, that means there's a cost, an interrupt cost. Now, work has been done again on the telephone, and because email was thought not to interrupt us because we take control of when we check our inboxes, it was thought that there wasn't an interrupt cost. But it turns out that it takes an average of 1 minute and 44 seconds just for us to regain our train of thought after we have finished dealing with the email that just came in. 70% of us respond to email within 6 seconds. So that's faster than letting the phone ring 3 times. So because we are wasting this time just figuring out what we were doing, and because we're checking our inbox every 5 minutes, for some people, email is turning into a bit of a problem, and we can't really afford to spend that amount of time, kind of like a day a week, figuring out what we were doing. So why are we so obsessed with our inbox? Well, I want to talk now about some rats that can give us an insight into what's going on in our inbox. There was a psychologist called B.F. Skinner who, in the 50s, created a nice little cage, put rats in, with a lever that dispensed food. And the rats very rapidly learned that if they pressed the lever, a little food pellet came. And because the rats had discovered that if they did this thing, they got a reward, they pressed the lever again and again to get the food to arrive. And this is called operant conditioning. And the same sort of behavior is working for us in email, that when we check our email, occasionally we get a reward that comes through, which is in the form of a nice email. Not all email is created equal. Some of it is better than others. Maybe it's an email from someone you care about. Maybe it's a bit of praise from your boss. Maybe it's winning a big contract. But some email gives us an emotional reward. And so we have learned that if we click the check mail button, then we get more email. We get more reward. Now, one of the things that Skinner discovered was that if there was a reward every 5 presses, the rats would learn to press the lever 5 times, and they would get their little food pellet. But if he switched the schedule to random, so either a random number of presses or a random interval between rewards, the rats became obsessed. They would sit pressing the lever, and they would just keep going regardless of how much food came. Now, this is a mechanism, it has been suggested, that's at play with gambling addicts, and particularly at slot machines. Slot machines are compelling because you get a reward occasionally, but you can't predict when. You can't say, this is the schedule, and if I play this 5 times, I will get a reward. And if you think about it, that's pretty much what is at work with email as well, that the rewards that come in, the emails that you enjoy that come in on a random schedule, which means that the behavior that we have all unconsciously trained ourselves into is much more strongly embedded than perhaps we realize. But of course, we're not rats. We have a conscious mind. We can think things through logically. And there are other factors at play into why email has become all-consuming. And particularly in reasons for not just why we check our inbox, but why we send so much email. I mean, if there are some people getting 250, 300 emails a day, that's got to be coming from somewhere. Somebody is sending it. Now, one of the issues is that email has become a proxy for work. When we were in a manufacturing environment and we were all making spanners and widgets and cars and stuff, you could tell how productive someone was because you could see how many physical objects they had produced. But we're not making spanners anymore, so it's very difficult for us to understand how much effort has gone into something, how productive we're being. Even if you do things like if you're a programmer and counting lines of code, that doesn't actually tell you how productive someone's been because they can just write lots and lots of very bad code. So email has become one of these proxies. If we send lots of email, clearly we must be doing lots of work. Emails also become bound up in status as well. There's almost this sort of perverse pride in the number of email that some people get. I mean, there's this conversation I've been a party to on many occasions where one person says, oh, I get 100 emails a day. Well, that's nothing. I get 200. Well, I get 500. And this feeling that, the more email you get, the higher your status is. And because status is kind of a sort of self-reinforcing, that if you're getting lots of email because you're high status, then sending lots of email must mean that you're even more important. And this kind of leads to almost like a martyrdom complex, that people are proud of spending a ridiculous amount of time sorting out their email. But there's also sort of defensive communication, that in times of uncertainty, people feel the need to cover their back, to say, well, yes, I did get your email, didn't you get my reply? And to actually make sure that we are completely covered on all fronts and that we can't be accused of not doing our job properly. But we can improve the situation, even if it is a bit of a mess. We need to understand much more clearly how we're using email. One client I worked with, we actually sat down with people and watched them as they used their inbox. And some of the things they did would make your toes curl. People using their inbox, with 50,000 unread messages and using it as an in tray for to-do items. But email, it is great for some stuff. It's good for one-to-one, confidential communications. It's not really great to use it as an inbox for your to-do items. So what we need to do is actually think about how we're using this tool and think of other ways that we could do the same tasks, but with much easier, much more relevant tools. So things like collaboration. We do a lot of collaboration by email, particularly on documents. Sending one document around to a dozen people and then hand merging all of their changes is one of the possibly most painful ways to work together. So using social tools like wikis for this make life much, much easier. Publishing information on blogs, ensuring everybody has RSS. You'd be surprised how many companies don't use RSS, don't have RSS readers for everybody in the company. Because even something as simple as subscribing to the blogs that you need for work, subscribing to Google alerts for stuff that is relevant to what you do, becomes much, much easier if you allow people to use RSS. But it's surprisingly rare. Using instant messenger and chat for instant conversation. Email opens itself up to exchanges that go on a lot longer than they need to, because everyone feels the need to be polite. We're still kind of working out what the etiquette here is with email. I certainly have seen people where they're over-polite. So you have your first email, hi, how are you? 2 paragraphs of that, finally get to the point, and then once you've answered the question, it goes on for another 4 or 5 emails just kind of saying, well, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. And it's very easy to get into that, and if you think about something like instant messenger or chat, you can make that question, ask that question, give the answer, and get through that much more quickly. But also the idea of having presence information available all the time about how available you are to be interrupted is one of the most important things about using something like IM or even Twitter. Being able to say to people, to broadcast, actually I'm really busy at the moment focusing, please don't interrupt me, or no, I'm here, you can ping me and ask me what you want. And again, that status information just isn't available by email. When we send an email, we assume that the recipient will deal with it at a time that is convenient for them. But because 70% of people respond to their alerts within a matter of seconds, what we're actually doing is the same as phoning someone or turning up at their desk, but it just takes a lot longer for us to get through that, that processing, responding to filing of the email itself. So one of the key problems, of course, with email is it is really embedded in our psyche. It's become so fundamental that we don't even think about how we as individuals are using it. We don't even think when we hit reply to all whether everybody needed to see our, yes, that's a good idea, response. But email, change is possible, and changing the way that we deal with email is possible, but we have to remember that this is really about behavioral change. It isn't so much about the tools, it's about people's day-to-day lives, it's about what they do every day and how we can make their tasks easier. Thank you very much.